Yeah, it's coming up with the setting up District 100 management.
You're still doing it?
I'm gonna try it a third time. Thus far, I know.
All right, you're good.
If you want to log in.
That should be good.
We're in there. Next one.
I got mine done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into that. Yeah, of course.
So I just wanted
Yeah.
to-
Oh,
Yeah.
So that-
Yeah.
You can take it.
okay. Good. So we'll take this off. And this is. Yeah.
I'm just gonna put this in so we need it later.
That works. Goal to not use it, though, right?
It is now 6:43 and we are out of closed executive session. At this time, we will reconvene the regular meeting of the Board of Education with a pledge to the American flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Booker.
Here.
Mr. Herrera.
Here.
Mrs. Howe. Ms. Mayville. Here. Mrs. Reed Nemick. Here. Mrs. Whitcomb.
Here.
Mr. Zicker.
Here.
Are there any items on the agenda any members of the board would like to amend or move? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda of the regular meeting of the Board of Education on August 16th, 2021 as presented?
So moved.
Member Whitcomb made a motion and Member Zickert seconded the motion to approve the agenda of the regular meeting of the Board of Education on August 16th, 2021 as presented. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Whitcomb,
Aye.
Mr. Zickert,
Aye.
Mr. Herrera,
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville. Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. At this time, members of the public and employees of District 100 who submitted comments via email will be read, and those attending in person may make public comments. Please remember, this is a business meeting of the school board, and comments outside individual public comment are not appropriate. If individuals continue to comment outside of their comment time, we will pause the meeting and ask Officer Kaplan to escort you from the meeting. Per board policy 2230, the board must allow a minimum of 30 minutes of public comment and a 20-minute minimum total length of time for any one subject. If we reach 30 minutes on any given topic this evening, I may request an end to public comment. In order to give the maximum number of people an opportunity to speak, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. All comments provided to the Board of Education via email prior to the meeting have been recorded on board docs and available for the public to view, but will not be read out loud tonight to allow the maximum number of people in attendance to speak. Ryan Curry, about masking.
Good evening. I'm sure I'm beating a dead horse here. My name is Ryan Curry. I have children in your school system. Only one this year because of what I felt was a misrepresentation of your constituents. I watched last month you guys debate back and forth about masks in our school, though like you felt were best for our children. And I wholeheartedly disagree with many of you on it. The same people that I watched in favor of masking children have parties at their homes or on Facebook, unmasks with hundreds of people, concerts at the fairgrounds, and yet you will sit up here and have the audacity to tell us that our children should be masks in school. The hypocrisy of that is unbelievable to me. You speak out of both sides of your mouths. You don't represent a political party. You represent me and my children. I hold you accountable to that. Every one of you. You are a representative and something to be very proud of a great school system. You are failing that school system. I wholeheartedly believe that. I understand that right now our hands are tied because of a mandate by our government. And I understand that you guys can't do a lot about that right now. But when the time comes, I hope the leadership is here and the courage is here to stand up to stuff like that, especially if they try to force vaccines in our children. I'm one person. I have 3 friends. I've lost 3 friends within hours of the second dose of a vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaccine person. I'm an anti-COVID vaccine person. There's no study out there. There's no nothing. And this, as I watch everybody in here lay over to this mask mandate, it makes me have very little faith on how we will approach these new issues as they come, whether it be vaccine or something else. So I ask you to represent us, okay? Not your party, not a governor, but the people that voted you into office and our children, okay? Because we need you. Thank you.
Mr. Curry.
Thank you.
Next, we have Matthew
Krula.
Krula. Speaking on masking.
I think I can speak for everyone here. Majority, we do not consent to you masking our children. There is nothing on record that said that this is healthy. You represent us and our children. But like the gentleman said, you are failing. You are not teaching our children to think critically. teaching our children to be independent. You are teaching them to follow the crowd. This has to stop. It doesn't help. There's actually evidence out there that suggests that this is unhealthy. People cannot read each other's faces. People cannot hear each other. We're supposed to be teaching our children, not teaching them to be afraid of everyone else or afraid of the air. No children should be masked. I'll say one final thing. Quote from Frederick Douglass. The whole history of progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made have been born of the earnest struggle. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or maybe both moral and physical. But it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what a people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. This is oppression. You are following what other people have said instead of standing up for what's right. Thank you.
Mr. Perloff. Next, we have Carla Gale. She'll be speaking about masking.
Good evening. My name is Carla Gale. This is my first year in the Belvedere Public School District and my 14th year registering my children for public school. Disgusted doesn't even come close to the emotion I feel as I stand here before you tonight. Over the past 2 years, I have watched an already struggling educational system become turned into a political circus, with our children now being used as pawns. Last school year was difficult, yet we reluctantly conformed to the new rules to ensure our children would be safe and could attend in-person learning during the uncertain times. This is not the case this year. We have history, we have data, and we have the common sense to know that what occurred last year was not in the best interest of our children. As we all know, children are very resilient when it comes to the coronavirus, and hospitalization is extremely rare. I could give you a number of references and speak for the next hour about how masks are not only ineffective, but also hazardous to their health. Instead, I will provide you with this letter. I have these into. What I want to focus on right now is a little more personal. We as parents love our children above all else, and it is our responsibility to ensure that they are raised properly and have everything they need to become successful individuals. At what point did we decide that it was your job, or ISBE's job, or IDPH's job to make decisions regarding the health and safety of our children? These masks that you're forcing them to wear are not only physically unappealing and uncomfortable, but they pose a significant threat to their social, emotional, educational, and physical well-being. Socially, children are making their very first connections with other children within the first few years of school. Facial expressions are key indicators in how we communicate. They assist in helping us read each other and understand each other's needs. Masks are making it even more difficult for children to interact with each other and understand basic human nature. Emotionally, children are being bullied and isolated because they have a particular belief about masks. Their parents' choices have made it into the classroom, even further dividing our population. They're also hiding behind them now. I mean, they're hiding behind acne and crooked teeth. They now accept them, and they're masking their flaws and insecurities, and we're encouraging them to conceal their flaws. There's also the issue of children having dirty masks or ugly masks or broken masks. Masks aren't natural and certainly don't promote a healthy body image. Educationally, their vocabulary is at the forefront of learning. How do we teach children to enunciate without having the ability to read our lips? I'm pretty sure eliminating key methods for instruction is not wise. Masks also deter students from answering questions. As an educated adult, I can barely understand people talking through a mask. Imagine how this affects a child who is already uncomfortable with class participation. Physically, it's not natural to strap fabric over your face. I can't tell you how many times my 9-year-old son told me last year, I hate coronavirus, my mouth stinks or my ears hurt. He had 4 warts removed from his face last year due to wearing a mask. They're dirty, kids touch their faces all day. He has allergies that cause his nose to run. There's often dry snot on the inside that has been rubbing against his mouth all day. I can't tell you how many times I applied Neosporin to the backs of his ears from the elastic causing lacerations. They develop tonsil stones from lack of fresh oxygen and bacteria being trapped in their mouths all day. And let us not forget that there is an entire school of thought surrounding the idea that children need to get sick to form a healthy immune system. Viruses are actually beneficial to children and strengthen their ability to fight off future infection. I'm sorry, but these unintended consequences sound more like child abuse than keeping kids safe to me. When the risk outweighs the rewards, it just doesn't make sense. So let me conclude by refuting your most recent excuse to remain idle when our children are at stake. The governor's threats that you reference as the driving factor for this universal mask mandate currently have no legal basis here in the state of Illinois. The amendment to House Bill 2789 filed last February, which is what the governor and ISB is referencing in their threatening letters, failed to pass the Senate on June 15th. Those amendments would have given the authority to the IDPH and ISB to act at the governor's discretion in times of emergency. There is currently no legal basis for the governor or ISB to impose mandates on local school districts. There is no legal means for ISB to deny accreditation or funding. If your attorneys encourage you to follow these mandates, you need new ones. I would like to ask that you provide the legislation that either explicitly states or implies that you no longer have the authority to make these local decisions. I would like that in my next email. We as parents and taxpayers do not agree to a universal mask mandate. We have the right to choose what's best for our children as elected officials. You have an obligation to represent our interests.
Ms.
We're at a crossroads.
You have reached your 3 minutes, please.
One more sentence. Will you be with us or act within your own political interests? I can promise we will not turn our backs on our children and take the easy route as you have done with us.
This is the legislative. Yes, it's highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Great job.
At this time, is there anyone else in the public that would like to make a comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to Board of Education Committee reports. Facilities and Long Range Planning Committee. Purpose of this committee is to monitor the district facility needs as it relates to student population growth within the facilities maintenance, and will consist of 2 board members, the superintendent, the school district architect, facilities director, 3 community members representing Belvidere, rural Boone County, and Poplar Grove, Caledonia area, and others as appointed by the president. Dr. Brown, since we're going to be the administrator that will be primarily spearheading the long range planning. Talk a little bit about what we'll be starting with.
Sure. Maybe just a little history first on what the committee really did in the past. It's not been active for probably close to 15 years now. Its purpose when it was originally formed many years ago was due to the rapid growth. So it was really designed to help for new schools and managed growth. And so that's really what it was in. So today we find ourselves in a different situation where our enrollment is actually going in the opposite direction. And so what we'd like to do is just really get a group back together so we can refresh the community's knowledge about what our existing facilities are, the condition of our existing facilities, which is very, very good. Take a look at all of our recent 10-year health life safety reports, and then really get down to business on prioritizing, facility improvements. So that's what
I'm looking probably at a timeline of 2 years or so,
I
probably.
think so. Yep.
In the beginning of September, an email will go out to all students as well as parents requesting anyone wishing to volunteer for board committees. The long range planning and facilities will be one of the ones that parents can volunteer for. Just kind of keep an eye on your emails if you would like to do so. Curriculum committee. Mr. Zickert, do you have anything you would like to add or highlight from the curriculum committee report?
No, just a little briefly. The curriculum committee met, most of the board members were there, so it really wasn't anything to report back on since almost everybody was there anyway. So I don't want to rehash stuff we sat through. I just think the highlights of it were Megan Johnson gave an overview of the grant process that we have to go through for the ESSER funding. We're getting a pretty sizable amount. That portion of it would be probably somewhere between 11 and $12 million that we use in the S3. The group, and there were teachers, board members, and central office staff there. We're given 5 buckets that we were talking about putting in things from during school to after school to at home, things like that. They were given the opportunity to offer suggestions for other strategies to consider or missed measurements that we would use to judge which one of those we wanted to do and not do. And the central office at the very end, as we wrapped it up, essentially said, we will incorporate, or we will look at what was suggested on the notes around each one of the buckets and synthesize that into what we're going to do as we proceed forward. And that's pretty much the extent of it.
Mrs. McGill, do you have anything to add?
I do.
Does anyone have any questions? Discussion? Moving on to business services committee meeting. Mr. Booker, do you have anything you would like to add or highlight in the business services committee report? Mrs. Hope? do you have anything to add? Okay, does anyone have any questions for the board business services committee members? Moving on. Consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda any members of the board would like to take out for separate consideration?
Yeah, I do. The personnel report and the handbook, Mr. Campbell.
Member Whitcomb requested to have item number 2, personnel report, and item number 8, district handbook removed. Not removed, but taken separately.
Yes.
Any other requests? Do I have a motion to approve consent agenda item number 2 as presented? Member Hauk made a motion and member Herrera seconded the motion to approve consent agenda item number 2 as presented. Discussion?
So I had a question about a couple. I had a question about a couple of items that are on the personnel report. I think my notes have them listed in reverse order, so I'll start with the bilingual coordinator. Is that a position that, are we replacing someone in that position? Is that ESSER grant funded? I know that the ESSER grant money talked about bilingual liaisons. Is that what it is? What is that position? Where is it?
That's a position that we're replacing. That's the person works with a director of bilingual director.
Okay. And the second one is the school health coordinator. So in the previous year, that was so this is a replacement as well, right? We're replacing someone who's leaving. In the previous year, so I'm wondering about the difference in some salary numbers. So previously, when that position was enacted last year, we paid that individual just under $70,300. Last month's board meeting indicated in the ESSER funding information that the budgeted amount for that position was $80,000, so nearly $10,000 above what the last individual had been paid. But it comes to us tonight at a salary of $90,000. And so I'm just looking for some insight on the previous individual had a certificate, a school nurse certificate. So there was obviously some attractiveness there. There was the ability for some duality of role if necessary. But how did we go from 70 to proposed was 80 in the information last month to 90 in the request to approve?
Generally, we
negotiate with that individual for that position. Before we bring salary to the board. That's the negotiated salary. Spending that right now.
So that's 10,000 above what we had estimated in the grant that we've allocated for that. And I understand we go back and forth about it's fluid and all of those things. It's a grant position, right? So it's a 2-year position. But in previous conversation, it's been forecast that the likelihood is that this position might morph into something else and be a longer term position.
That's a possibility. I'm not sure. But we did clearly communicate it and post it as a grant fund position.
How many more positions?
I can help you with the numbers a little bit. So, the person that was hired last year did not start at the beginning of the year in July, which is why they came in right around that $77,000 number. This position is budgeted to start on July 1st and go through June 30th. And so when we were guessing at what it was going to be for the grant, we knew we weren't going to hire somebody probably as of July 1st. So for that current first year, we plugged in around. If this person starts in September, when you annualize what we get paid based on a $90,000 salary, it would be $75,000 for this fiscal year. And so that's the budget, that. So that's where we're kind of coming. So when you take the 90,000 divided by 12 months and then just say it's 10 months, it ends up being about 75,000. So we didn't budget necessarily what somebody's salary was going to be. We budgeted because we budget on a cash basis what we thought we were actually going to pay.
In the ESSER grant money, you mean?
Yeah, because we
Okay.
report on a cash basis, and so we budget on a cash basis.
So where did we get the $80,000 number?
That we thought we were going to hire them earlier than what we're going to end up hiring. So we thought by the time we got somebody hired, we paid roughly 80 on a current basis, on a cash basis, not necessarily, Now, if this person we thought was going to start on July 1st, we would budget 90. That's what we would put in there. If that's what we thought we were going to pay them, that's what we would budget. But we report the number on a cash basis, not on a full basis. And so if somebody starts in September, we take a $90,000 salary. That isn't going to be from 9/7 through June 30th. That's the annualized salary. But then they only get paid based on the amount of time they work in that 12-month period.
But next year, we're gonna pay them 90,000.
Good, yep. And so when we do the budget
Or more.
for next year, then we'll have to update it for what the salary is going to be for next year.
So is there a way to make that more clear on the information that we receive? Because it says salary, 80,000, benefits another 20. So when I read that, I interpret that our best faith estimate is that we're gonna hire someone at $80,000 for a year's worth of work. And you're saying, well, no, that was just a projected amount for a prorated amount of the year.
Right.
So if that's gonna possibly happen on an ebb and flow basis going forward, it's probably, is there a way, I guess I would just look for those numbers to be maybe more clearly identified as that being the case.
Sure, yeah.
That's something that's,
Yeah, you bet.
because what it looks like is someone new is going to be paid $20,000 more than the last person we hired.
Right.
And 10,000 more than we had actually budgeted for the position.
Right, yeah. No, absolutely.
Have the duties for this individual changed at all last year over this year? I know last year there was a lot of protocols that had to be written, obviously, because it was the first time.
Yeah, I would say the nature of the job going into this year will be there some of that. I mean, we're expecting that person to come in and do the same thing that we think this person did.
Are there still protocols to be created? Because that was a significant part of the job in the beginning, right? Are the protocols not in place?
There are protocols in place. In fact, Lisa and I have been working through a decision, too. And so one of the things the whole player will do is she will help the manage that along with me and to a lesser degree there. When your situations where we have to quarantine and doing contact tracing and type of thing, she would be the main person doing it with Dan and assistants the rest of the year.
Example of protocol shifts is last year we had 14-day quarantines. Generally, everything was a 14-day quarantine. But this year, the quarantines are updated. They're no longer include vaccinated individuals, so we need a protocol for that. But there are also 10-day, 7-day, and test to state protocol. So picking them back as long as they're willing to do a PCR test on day 1, 3, 5, and 7. So there's just some of the protocol from last year is the same. Some of it's gone away. We don't have days off that staff can take. Last year, so that protocol can go away. But likely the protocol will continue to do that.
And it'll be the response, it'll be this person's responsibility to stay on top of it.
Stay on top of context.
Any changes in protocols, the protocols, members will probably change and evolve throughout the year.
Is this somebody that can fill in for one of our nurses in our schools? If one of our nurses had to get moved to, let's say, the health department or something like that? Can this health coordinator actually work in a school as a school nurse?
She could do that, but that would be a last resort. I think another one of the responsibilities is to oversee a nurse sub pool. So she would manage the sub pool first, as a last resort, she could do that. But we're really trying to free this person up so they can manage the protocols and work with the principals and the nurses. Yes, she could.
So she's got that certification? Any other discussion? Roll call, please. Mrs. Howe. Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Zicker.
Aye.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Ms. Fangel. Mrs. Reed-Heeman.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Do I have a motion to approve consent agenda item number 8, district handbook as presented? Member Howe made a motion and member Zickert seconded the motion to approve consent agenda item number 8, district handbook as presented. Discussion.
So the question that I have is just one of consensus, and it's because of emails that Dr. Weisman and I have had since the last meeting. We have 2 policies that specifically advise, one of which we talked about and another that I just in reviewing looked at, policy 7270 and 7180, that in the policy itself address or indicate specifically that the handbook shall include a copy of the policy. So if we look at policy 7270 as the example, or the other one, 7180, and the handbook does not contain a copy of the policy, it contains a summary of the policy. And so I'm looking at the fact that we need to either, as I estimate, we have some discussion about if the policy calls for it, do we just include the policy as called for in it, in the handbook, and just say, let's just plug it in there? Or do we look at it and say at some point, are we looking to evaluate the prudency of amending the policy, not to stipulate that it would be included in the handbook? And I don't necessarily have a position either way, except to say we're not currently congruent with the policy in those 2 scenarios.
The most expeditious way to do this would probably be to direct me to include a copy of the policy in the handbook. Then go through the voting process right now to just and then we can just copy and paste that policy. I think that's probably the path of least resistance, because the policy brings to but I also don't necessarily have a strong.
Pardon? Well, I don't know what other people's position is. I'm not looking to say one way or the other. I don't have a strong position either, other than to say we need to be consistent in that we would follow policy. So we either amend the policy or we, I mean, I don't have a strong sense either way. I don't have a position except to say, I mean, I could agree with Dr. Weisman that if he thinks that the most efficient way to get it done is to just put the policy verbatim into handbook, then, I mean,
To make it consistent.
Exactly.
Member Booker made a motion, and Member Zickert seconded the motion to amend the item number 8, or excuse me, amend the motion, consent agenda item number 8, district handbook, to include the policies verbatim in the handbook versus summarizing.
right, for policy 7270 and 7180.
For policies 7180 and 7270. Any discussion on the amendment?
So are we just voting on the amendment?
We will be voting on the amendment first, and then we will be voting on the amended motion.
Nope, say that again. Sorry, say that again.
We will be voting on whether or not to make the amendment to include the verbatim of policy 2180 and policy 270 in the handbook.
So the original motion is not voted on. We're just voting on.
We're just voting on it to add verbatim language. Roll call, please.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Zickert.
Aye.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mrs. Hope.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville.
Aye.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. Motion passes. Now we're back to the original motion to approve consent agenda item number 8 as amended. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Hope.
Aye.
Mr. Zickert.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville.
Aye.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. Do I have a motion to approve the remainder of consent agenda items? Those items being number 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11.
So moved.
Second.
Member Whitcomb made a motion and Member Herrera seconded the motion to approve consent agenda items number 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11. As presented. Discussion? Roll call, please. Oh, sorry. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the following donations. School supplies from Belfiore Dental for Washington Academy. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Zickert.
Aye.
Mrs. Howe. Ms. Mayville. Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. Next, we have our roll call items. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 have been pulled by administration. Moving on to item number 4. ESSER 3 grant application approval. Dr. Weisman?
So, we came to session first. So
Do I have a motion to approve ESSER 3 grant application approval as presented?
Okay.
Member Herrera made a motion and Member Zickert seconded the motion to approve the ESSER 3 grant application as presented. Discussion. Dr. Weisman.
So, Mr. Zickert referenced the answer conversation that we had at curriculum committee. We memo here addresses those 5 buckets. Trying to incrementalize our support into the large majority of ESSER funds. We are planning on using for student-facing services. As part of the ESSER process, we do have to apply for the grant. So there's a lot of continued work that we need to do to finalize the strategies, short the strategies, and talk probably as a board about how you want to measure progress. In the meantime, it seemed like the big buckets at least were appropriate from that curriculum committee discussion. So Dr. Johnson is planning on submitting that. So there's a couple different ways you can look at it. They all, I think, say the same thing. There's a community explanation that we reviewed at curriculum committee that talks about the different areas of support. There's a document that's grant allocation numbers. You can see broken up differently. How we account for that. The categories are just different. They're not community friendly and more educational needs. And then there's the actual grant application, which is what would be approved tonight. That, for the most part, sets out general plans for the utilization of money, whether they fall into the categories of salary, benefits, contractual services, supplies of equipment, and then the general overview of how we're going to report back on a regular basis to. That's that okay, something.
Language of the application on page 3 indicates the grant period begin date. It says July 1, if received by due date. Does that mean then that what we are approving today would backdate to July 1?
Yes.
And then eligible reimbursement period, March 13th of 2020. So we can actually, if we get the grant, go back and kind of move the funds around. How does that work?
It's yeah, it's their work. They've allowed all of them to go all the way back to March 13th when they declared the emergency. But you really are not supposed to go back and try and reallocate things to the prior period. They did that just because they told districts they could start to spend the money, even if they didn't have an approved grant, because they knew that like emergency things were going to be purchased. And so that just gave us the authority in case we already spent money before the grant. We haven't spent anything out of that. So we would never go back and look back.
Any other discussion?
I have a question. Approving this versus the first portion, which is the green expansion. And we had a meeting with the curriculum committee. By the way, I thought it was a great meeting for all parents and everybody that showed up and gave good input. At the very end of this under structural change is the equity audit is at the very end. And I'm not sure if that really belongs in this because it originated somewhere else. And we had asked for more detail and a presentation and some more information, which we had never gotten. And then it got put into this, which I'm not sure belongs here. And then we still don't have the information. And it's just essentially we're going to approve that. Is that in the actual grant?
There is no line item.
Okay, so then we still haven't gotten any information on it. Yet now we're going to approve it and ask for more information. Should it be pulled out of this and stand on its own and come, and so we can go through the original process where we ask for information and go through that.
clarify just the reading of the grant, what it says, programmatic review of district-wide programs such as, so it's preschool MTSS data analysis and or equity by outside or independent company to understand strengths and areas of improvement in order to effectively and efficiently address learning loss. There's an and or in there, this, so in terms of the grant, we've got a few things listed, because for the grant purposes, if I just wrote programmatic review, they would send it back to me in corrections and say, well, what are you reviewing? And so from that purpose, it's the and or.
There's some clarification of what it is.
Dr. Wickman, was this recommended? Who recommended this? I can't remember. Someone did, and I can't remember who. Somebody is recommending that districts do equity audits. Is that correct?
Yeah,
He said it's only important.
Well, no, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I see what you mean, but I think that this is something that we're trying to do proactively to satisfy something.
So the state superintendent has been recommending, the new state superintendent has been recommending that districts consider equity initiatives and equity audits as an example that the students do. And then it came up, it's come up, possible examples of things that we could do initially when the strategic plan refresh right before COVID, so about a year and a half ago, and there were some community members got together and they identified as a priority area celebrating, recognizing what's exactly
Individual cultural differences.
individual and cultural differences. So that was an example of something that the district could do as part of that. So the board did ask me to do some more research and come back. At that point, the individual vendor that I brought as an example, when I went back and talked to her, she was not necessarily willing to come and speak to the board about her work. So that's the priority for the group. So
She also had an answer.
she was really busy for the second year, and the school districts all around the state using her, so she's like, well, I'm not gonna be able to come to talk to you, I need an answer the next week, I'm booked. So I just said, you know, maybe in the future, but probably not now. So she was highly recommended, that was, but I do still need to, at that point, start in schools. It's taking attention, so eventually I need to come back to the board for a specific plan for that. This is just intended to, if the board desires, we could allocate money from the grant to pay for that, if the board wants to move forward with that. I would consider this as a doing equity audit rather than fund out, external fund allocated. For grants.
So for clarification, this is an eligible expense. That's a three, correct?
Yes.
Expense earned program, yes.
So I have a question about the eligibility, just because I wasn't on the board at that time, but if this initiative began and the input for the suggestion of exploring issues of equity predates COVID, then how are we putting this in as a response to COVID and the utilization of ESSER funds for this audit being related to the COVID?
I think obviously we didn't anticipate COVID, the equity audit didn't come up in the context of COVID, but now that COVID's occurred, it would be prudent to look at student progress and student achievement, looking through the lens of COVID. We have a lot of kids who have fallen behind because of COVID. And I think we could, with a straight face, say we would like to use ESSER funds to see who is being impacted the most. So it's not, I don't think it's a stretch to ask for this money under the ESSER grant, and if grant funders decide that that's not the appropriate use of the money, I'm sure we can do that. But certainly, if we can use grant funding to pay for something that the board had indicated we're interested in doing anyway, should the board continue to express an interest in doing it,
I guess I don't see that.
And generally, although Dr. Johnson might come in here with specific, but generally there are ample provisions in the ESSER descriptions that allow us to allocate money in ways that would help the system advance equity. So if they come up before a grant is written in such a way that if we have identified strategies for advancing equity, they can not recognize.
Yeah, and they'll talk, when we attend the webinars and listen to the state superintendent, they talk about identifying, Michael had mentioned, the students that have been impacted more than others. And so not only are you closing a gap, but also just identifying potentially this greater. But we did, we also had the discussion that some of the programmatic reviews are if there's funding still available. So what happens, what Dr. Brown and I have done already with ESSER 1 is you figure out where you were off on your initial budget. So there is a chance, depending on how things go over the next couple of years, that we could take a look at this in the next year or so and say, oh, we were off on some of these. We're not going to go do the programmatic. In that case, we'd have to amend the dollar amount.
See, I look at it as, I agree with Ms. Mabel, but looking at deficiencies in student learning to me is of the utmost importance. And I've said that many times. The more we can do for students to make up for last year, the better off we are. And that's what we should do. A bulk of that money should go for anything that can directly affect the students in a positive way. My only concern is that without knowing exactly what we're going to do, for sure, and just talking generalities right now, is that is going to be implicit approval to do something a year from now that we may or may not mean.
That is exactly.
This could be or couldn't be a major issue, depending on how it's interpreted, how it's approached, a lot of other things. As a general, making up student deficiencies, I'm 100% for wholeheartedly. I think that's what all our efforts, not all, but a lot of our efforts are going to. But what I'm nervous about is approving this. It may morph into something. I'm nervous that it may morph into something a year from now that we're going to say we approved that really wasn't the intent of what we wanted to do at the time. It might be, but without knowing either way, it's hard to decide right now. I guess that's my only try.
I agree totally with that. And if it's not in here and we get more information on it, can't you put it into the ESSER? And later, once we actually get feedback and information.
We could amend it.
Exactly. So
Well, and conversely, I think you look at the fact that if the equity audit is a good idea, then we come to a decision about that. We go through the steps to approve an equity audit. And regardless of whether or not there's money left, if an equity audit is a good idea, then it's a good idea, right? So we don't hold it out into a grant that says, well, if we get there eventually and we still have money left over, we might do that. I think both sides of that equation are very, very true. The idea that we could be a year from now looking at saying, well, no, you did approve it already, we're going forward with it. And that wasn't the understanding perhaps of some or many. And then secondarily, if we run out of money and it was a good idea and an initiative of the State Board of Education and something that they recommended we should be doing, and well, now we're not going to do it because we don't have any more money. So I feel like it should be something that stands on its own, and at some point in time, when it comes up and we work on it, then great. I mean, if there's value in it, and a number of people have said there's.
Would the equity audit come back to the board for the vote? Down the road?
That's your preference.
Can we direct the administration that we would apply the yes or no on the audit come back to the board?
that's kind of what we did.
Okay, so then why would we not apply for grant funds for that now to see a way if we want to do it in the future, we can use grant funding for it. If we don't want to use it, if we don't want to do it in the future, we don't have to bring this back and have Megan amend the grant. It's there.
For the reasons Matt just said.
But we're
We want more
saying,
We want more teachers.
yeah, and we're not agreeing to do it right now. We're asking for the funding. So that if we agree to do it, once we get more information, where the district isn't paying out of pocket for it, we've got grant funding.
Which she just said we still can add it later.
Right, but why, it's in here. Why not? What's the harm in including it now? It's not, we're not implicitly approving it now. We're asking for grant funding for it now. We're directing administration to bring it back so that the board can decide whether to go ahead with it. We've already screwed around with it so long that our preferred vendor got too busy and said, I can't come in and present to you.
That had nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
It took too long.
yeah, it was on the agenda. People had so many questions at that meeting. We said, okay, ask her if she can come in to present to us. Dr. Reisman asked this person to come and present to us. She's already too busy doing this into my district. She said, sorry, no can do. So down the road, when Dr. Reisman finds another vendor who'll be able to do this and can schedule them to come in to talk to us, the grant funding's there. That's off the table. We don't have to talk to Greg about, hey, is this in the budget? Is this out of the budget? Will the grant be approved? We don't know. We don't know whether we'll get funding for this or not. Okay? If we include it here, we'll know whether we have grant funding for it and can use that as a factor when we're deciding whether to pursue it or not.
I would rather, just to chime in on that, streamline this process as well. I mean, just every other line item and eligible program or cost is the same thing. I mean, theoretically, we don't know what that's gonna look like ultimately, right? But we're getting it approved so that the administration can put something together and can act on it versus us having to wait around, having to come back. Yes, ultimately, we'd like it to come back to the board for approval with that audit, but as an eligible expense so that the administration can start at least planning for that or working through something would be helpful to streamline the process. Just like every other item that's in the ESSER fund. Ultimately, what that's going to be for all those items, we don't. We have an idea. That's the plan. Ultimately, it gets formulated and executed at some point.
But the item never originated there. You would have had it there in the first place. That's what we want.
But it became an eligible expense according to Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Brown as a, what do.
It was not an eligible expense before.
The grant didn't exist before.
In 1 or 2,
In 1 or
it
2.
wasn't something you thought about in 1 or 2 because there were other priorities in 1 or
And it said it
2.
was however long ago.
But, yeah. I think the initial discussion at the board level around the equity audit was like the month before COVID. We had done implicit bias training for staff that first semester, and then we came back to the board and made some recommendations about here's what our staff have learned, here's the things that we would recommend that the board consider so that they can be part of that work. Implicit bias training for the board was one, and system-wide equity audit. So that was all like weeks before.
I just don't understand why we would want to know whether or not we have grant funding for it beforehand. If we can know that.
Because she said you can add it in.
But that doesn't mean it'll be granted at any time. It means we can apply for it at any time.
Dr. Johnson, it doesn't specifically say equity audit, it just says equity, correct? Programs in regards to equity, correct?
Like programs such as.
And it doesn't say equity audit, it just says programs such as to provide for the equity, correct?
Yeah, it'll just say and or equity.
So it doesn't specifically say equity audit. So it could be anything that we are providing to the equities. Whether it's masks for every kid we walk in or whatever. And Dr. Wiesman, any type of large contract or anything like that, we would have to do that. Any type of like contract or any type of third-party contract if it's over a certain amount.
I still haven't found, I'm not aware of that.
But we can give you direction, but
You can give them direction, definitely.
that we would like to see the equity audit come back with those programs.
And it'd probably be useful to also know if there are concerns about moving forward and executing these. If there's anything else on any of the strategies listed here that we should not begin moving forward on, other than the programmatic reviews. We would like detailed plans on before we start executing. This being one of them, we would like more detailed plan on the equity audit. We're moving forward on it. Definitely do that first.
Well, personally, I guess I'm fine with that personally. I'd like information on the program reviews as we go along. We have people doing that now. Sarah Graham, as an example, that we're already doing that before we had some money and things like that. So I'm just want to make sure we don't have duplicity. We got one of our persons doing something, but now we're paying somebody else to do something. And what's that person going to do? Benefiting with a pretty sizable salary. So that, and for me, that.
Are there any similar, that makes sense? Are there any similar requests for any of the other areas like the quarantine tutors, additional counselors, intervention staff? Stipends for credit recovery. That's being, or sorry, community explanation. That we should not move forward on.
Are you saying you don't want them to move forward, Matt, or are you saying that as they move forward, you want regular updates? I'm just trying to understand what specifically you're.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I just like to know what they're gonna do before we actually do it, so it's not, so we don't, I mean, we're paying somebody now, the period is, I think it's gonna be small. To do program, I apologize. To do a program review on those, for example, then, and we got other people doing other stuff on things like that. And we're doing the curriculum review for some other stuff that's on the cyclical stuff. So we're having our already central office personnel doing that. Then what are we going to do for other program review? Who's going to be doing it? And is that going to take away from what people are already doing? I don't know. I'm just asking a question. I just want to make sure we're going to do it. We don't outsource our own people, so to speak. And then we have to figure out what they're going to do when we're already doing some of that stuff anyway.
That sounds like something maybe a quarterly update.
Yeah, we can definitely provide pretty regular updates on the program reviews that Sarah's doing. The research we have listed here, and that we feel like bringing some outside expertise. The reason why we do, partially the reason why we do that research. And I have no problem bringing any of these back. I think if probably all of them are situations where as a board, it's only going to be useful for you if you do the research, if you are interested in making a change after the research, if possible. So if there's not interest for expanding early childhood, we probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah,
As an example.
Yeah, as an example, I'd be in favor of doing that stuff. Because I think, in my opinion, one person's opinion, we've done that stuff in the past with a lot of other stuff. And we haven't necessarily seen advancements because of that. Like I said, I could have that horse, but you look at the test scores on math and reading, for example, they've been stagnant for a lot of years. So whatever we've done hasn't worked. Or maybe it is working, maybe we just don't know how well. Maybe it's speeding up, making it even worse. I don't know. But I think if we do stuff like that, I'd like to see if they have suggestions on it. I'm not against doing it. I just want to find some way to measure it so it'll be successful. So we don't just do it and end up the same place we were 2 years later.
And with the directive that that the approval to make sure we're creating equitable environments and that we're using the money in that way is not a consent now to do an audit with those funds. That if an audit is going to occur, that will specifically come back to the board for the purpose of discussion and ultimately vote.
Definitely, my impression is that anything probably that fits under that research bucket I should bring back to the board. to review on this board. Some of it's specific on the equity audit, some of it's specifically meant to make sure we're not. overlooking
Structure that last,
services.
that fifth bucket,
Yep.
those maybes,
Yes.
if we get to this. Okay.
Yeah, because ultimately, we won't know whether or not we could start those until we have
We're comfortable
progress
with what we've
updates
done.
on the other 4 buckets.
Yep.
Is that clear? Do you need?
So I think I'm clear on the research. There are a handful of other strategies listed here. that Would like to move forward on. That's the only concern about executing. My assumption would be it's okay for me to move on everything else. Other than those research, everything that's after student facing supports are fully funded available, research maybe everything else we're comfortable with us moving forward.
So students at school, during the day, students at home during the day, students extended day at school, extended day at home. Those 4 buckets are the 4 buckets you're understanding that we're okay with moving forward with. We don't have any additional questions on. If we're summarizing what your position is right now. Yeah, I think so. I mean, from the time.
So structural change, research improvements.
Yes, I probably should ask specifically, there's number 1, under structural changes, a part-time social worker available for staff support, a staff member for state benefit and community classroom needs. Would you like me to bring back more information on that?
Would that be 1 social worker
It was part-time social worker.
at each school?
Total for the district.
For staff.
And that's a $250,000
Yeah, that can't be right.
cost.
No, that's for the life of the grant. For you.
3 years.
Oh, God. Okay. Okay. Sorry.
It's a really
It's really
expensive
good.
part-time.
So, I'll apply.
You thought the nurse was expensive?
Here's how it works.
I think we covered
Yeah.
it.
I think maybe it's just cleanest to say if we get to structural changes in research and we have money there, then we just talk about all of that. Because maybe at that point, we decide based on all the other interventions that we've done, we'd rather jump to funding research on early childhood, or, you know, maybe our priority order would change there. I guess I would just weigh in there. Under, you know, not that it can't be in the grant, but that once we get to other duties as assigned or leftover money, if you will, we just.
And I just have one other on the bottom regarding measurements, the utilization of, under goals, the utilization, those would be what you bring to the board as to if we're meeting the goal being reducing COVID learning loss.
So, I don't have targets in there specifically. and that was in the curriculum. And I do have, I think, later on. We do have later on in the agenda, just discussion about ESSER goals. So I think it would be a good idea for the board to get some direction around overall goals.
We did the meeting. We did. It was-
Can you,
but,
Yes.
oh, At the curriculum meeting, we kind of broke down a lot. The week. My thought was going to kind of incorporate it into this summary plan. And kind of just put this. Make that more detailed.
Well, the good news is tonight we're voting on the application, right?
It's just the application.
Yeah,
Got it.
and then we'll continue to have those discussions about where will those additional strategies and or measures be incorporated. Okay, yeah.
Got it.
there's a motion on the floor to approve the ESSER 3 grant application as presented. Roll call, please.
As presented with the last portion. Said as presented.
So the application,
The application is the
Oh, yes,
application.
yes. Okay, okay.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Herrera,
Aye.
Mr. Zickert.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville. Aye. Mrs. Hauk. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. Do I have a motion to approve the return to school plans 2021-2022 school year as presented?
Second.
Member Houck made a motion and member Herrera seconded the motion to approve the return to school plans 2021-2022 school year as presented. Discussion?
So, just so everybody knows, I did have a pretty significant typo in here. Right before the meeting started. Under discipline. We have continued non-compliance in school may require, it was listed as an in-school suspension and then later. In-school suspensions will not be used as a disciplinary measure. So our proposal is, and that was just a title, our proposal is that continue non-compliance with mask require out of school suspension. Other than that, I think that's correct. We are not planning on using in-school suspensions for disciplinary measures for students who refuse to work.
Oh, so that's very significant.
Yes,
then.
that's a significant.
Oh, because all along I was thinking you were suggesting in school system, I mean, that was your recommendation. So you're saying now, the typo was that none of those suspensions would be in school.
Correct. I believe that's the only change that makes sense.
There was somewhere else that I read, and I think again, it's just a typo, but I'm trying, let me find it. Go ahead with the discussion, I'll find it. Yeah, 3B, in the event a parent or guardian refuses to pick up the child, administration may have to consider involving the policy, Virginia the police.
Yes.
Page is that on?
5 of 10. 3B.
Yes, police, just like police.
Is that something that you foresee having to do?
Not really. So I think this just depends on how the community reacts to the mask mandate. Probably 2 to 3 times a year, we do have a child who requests for the parents to come pick up, and the parent either cannot come pick the child up or refuses to come pick the child up. And once we work through emergency contacts, don't have a way for the child to be picked up. So absent the principal taking the child home for the night. Doesn't happen very often, but does happen.
Following the vote tonight, if anything needs to be changed, as things change very frequently, how would changes be done or be dealt with?
So the way that we're presenting it is such that at the very beginning on that first page, we just we said the plans being presented to the board for approval, but it's soon to be subject to change for guidelines at the discretion of the superintendent. So last year, the way I did this was if there was a change that was specific to public health entity giving different guidance, then we made that change. If there was a change that was clarifying what the initial intent was to the plan and seemed obvious, but was just to clarify internally, then we made that update. If there were large changes that seemed like a departure from the intent of the return to school plan, such as going back to school in person, and we brought those back to the school board because we had some time to make that decision. So that's how it's presented now, is that superintendent was just
Refresh my recollection at some point, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't recall, because there was a lot of fluidity there going back and forth. There was a level of change that at the time was at the discretion of the superintendent with the involvement or, I don't know, permission is probably the wrong word, I don't know what the right word would be, the board president. Right, at the time, what there, at some part in the code, what part of those three levels of modification, and are we looking to do the same thing here, or?
So yeah, good question. Last year, the changes have another level of oversight. I think there's actually some board policy that references board oversight for when the governor has issued a emergency declaration. There's a new policy that came out in response to that declaration. And pandemic, and then we had to require. Yep. So I don't remember, Ms. Mayville, what decisions I made without you and what decisions we talked about. I know definitely the decisions about like returning to school after being all remote. We talked about extensively and brought back to the code for both. I don't remember the in between how much of it.
I don't remember any significant changes that I was involved in between.
We could, yeah, we could definitely put that in there. It could be at the discretion of the superintendent. Board president, for example.
I don't think it's realistic to have, we're not all gonna be able to reconvene, right? It's just not realistic to say that you're gonna get the whole board back together to vote for changes that maybe need to happen pretty quickly. But I know that that was a past practice, that there was a, sort of a superintendent and board, and again, I don't recall all the specifics of which level or types of change, but
Resolution that was passed.
Yeah. I remember that there was a resolution that we passed.
In the event, in the
the
event of an emergency declaration.
so would that be you? But that resolution has expired?
emergency order is expired. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if the resolution applied. Okay, I gotta check that out on that.
Well, and maybe you don't. I mean, I'm just saying, is there, I just know that that was a past practice, that it's not reasonable for everyone to reconvene as promptly as might be necessary to react and respond as quickly as possible to, the guidance and the changes that are presented. And is there any conversation or interest surrounding having a secondary layer of conversation at any point in time? And maybe there's not. I mean, if there's not, there's not. And that's, we can move on to discussion of the plan itself.
Generally, especially at the beginning when we made most of the changes, I was doing a weekly update to our staff. Changes just so they knew all of the minor tweaks or updating the staff. So here's the updates for the week. We have to do something like that for the board.
What I find helpful is just the color. This is when this changed, or this is when it kind of changed. I just find it helpful that having a detailed.
Yeah, we can do that. Basis just the changes.
Dr. Weisman, can you summarize, obviously with a governor mandate, as many people have said, is not a law, but as public education goes, it's pretty close to
closest we can get probably to a law or policy. Can you summarize what would happen if we didn't follow?
So Executive Order 2021-18 requires face masks in school buildings for all individuals regardless of vaccination status. The governor indicated he expects schools to enforce the mask mandate similar to enforcing the school dress code. So we've been notified by the Illinois Association of School Boards, the Illinois State Board of Education, the state superintendent, and our own legal counsel that if we do not follow that once an executive order is issued, it has the effect of law. And so if we don't follow that, then there could be sanctions against the district that would expose the district, that would expose its employees and the board to unnecessary liability. So the big thing that this exposes to is a possible loss of state recognition. There was one school district that lost its recognition last week. It's a private school. There's some extra steps for the State Board of Education to prove recognition of public schools. That would take a little bit longer. Public schools generally have until September 30th to apply for annual recognition. But if we lose our state recognition, we're told that we would lose access to state funding. We would lose access for, we would lose the ability to have our students compete in the Illinois High School Association, elementary school association athletic competitions. These are all high school sports and middle school sports. And I think the other big thing in there is that seniors cannot graduate with state recognized diploma in schools. In addition to, no lot of conversation last month was about insurance. We've kind of set insurance to the side now and secondary problem, because the primary problem is we just generally different.
So districts we've already carried to do that. Sports, we're going to use it.
Sorry.
Districts in the area that we've heard have voted against mass option. They're going to lose their funding and they're not going to do it in sports.
So the risk is that they may lose their funding, like the school on Friday, or say, well, the school district. That they would lose their funding. They have until September 30th, I believe, to apply for that recognition. That's with the Office of Education. But that is the risk. That's what the state superintendent's told everybody that they're going to do. And they've just done it one time so far.
And if you were to lose it, you don't get the rest of the year, correct?
I mean, you can reapply for it and go for corrective action for it. So put together a plan stating, here's what we plan to do to be in compliance with the mask mandate.
And we cannot deviate. You can say like vaccinate kids.
That's not following the order. You could decide to do that. I would recommend you do that. Orders that all individuals in school wear masks. Students are present.
So any deviation from the order would put us at risk for reduction of state funding or loss of state funding, loss of the ability.
I guess I have some concerns about the discipline. I brought up, and Dr. Reese and I talked about the fact that, previously in the original version of it, it indicated that a student may be suspended for up to 2 weeks. Like that was legit. And I said, I don't, we're gonna have to be more specific than that if we're, that was too broad in my opinion to be sure that we were in compliance with our own policy and or Senate Bill 100. But I also understand the converse side of that is if there are no consequences for not wearing masks, then what? I see both sides, but I just.
You said earlier that.
I have a significant issue.
You said earlier that they recommended this the same as a dress code violation. Is this discipline the same as what our dress code violation? But it's suspended.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 100 actually requires that we don't have specific pre-designated discipline in most scenarios. So what we have is kind of generally a list of examples of when the student isn't following rules or being insubordinate. And then we have those like possible consequences that can be utilized. And the expectation is that administrators both can start at not non-exclusionary things like in a conference with the student, calling the parent, offering something different in a situation like a dress code, and offering something different for the student to wear. So you go through those and then if you utilize those, and it doesn't change the behavior, then it's exclusionary. So the child's not following dress code, refuses to put something different on, follow dress code, then you tell the child they need to leave and they cannot come back. That's their.
This is what we did last year.
So last year we didn't spell it out
Right.
specifically, but generally that was the approach for last year.
We have to suspend it.
No.
We put people on remote. I know that was something, I think that was in the record,
that was an option.
the plan, an option, would just be like, I think for second or third, they just be put on remote, which we don't have that option.
Give me a second, I can look at. Ask our administrators again here. So at the end of the spring, about 15% of our administrators said it was difficult to enforce a mask mandate. The rest of them said it was not difficult. And most of the schools have reported that in the spring they had between 0 and 5 incidents where they had to discipline students for not wearing a mask. There are 2 schools that were between 15 and 20.
Total or per day or?
Total.
Yeah.
So these, when they told me the consequences they used, they had verbal reprimands, conferences, lunch detentions. Many times it was just a conversation, it was fixed. One student continued to refuse to wear it and they were switched to remote learning. Issued warnings. Another example where a parent said to participate in remote learning instead. So generally, it looks like most of the time there was some type of verbal discussion or conference, but there are a couple of examples where students participated remotely.
Which again is not an option issue,
Correct.
but a very few number.
I would just like to say that I think we really missed the boat by requiring vaccine. It doesn't incentivize others to get vaccinated.
Will we see this again if the mandate for using goes away during the year? Will that then be something that would rise to come back to the school board for decision?
I'm happy to treat that way.
But if if the mask mandate went away, wouldn't we just be glad it went away? And, right? We just, I don't
We
know.
make the decision, if the mask mandate goes away, then the decision is made.
Right, because we would still
We
have
still have
this
to vote on it.
plan in
Oh, okay.
place, and we voted on this plan.
That
So,
wouldn't fall under the discretion of the
sure, it could.
superintendent.
I probably would be hesitant to make that decision all by myself because I mean, when we polled parents, it was really split. The majority of parents were really comfortable with masks on the surveys.
But optional, they can still wear it. I mean, when we get to the point that there's no longer a mandate, there's nothing that says parents who feel more comfortable with continuation of mask use, absolutely, they can continue with mask use, right? But I see what you're saying. I mean, to me, that just seems like, great, we get to that point, that's one of those administrative decisions. I mean, you could enact immediately and say, we're not under the mandate anymore. And we've given you the discretion in those areas where those 4 entities are involved to.
If the mask, yeah, if the mask mandate turns into a vaccination decision where if the child is vaccinated, then they do not have to wear a mask, they probably would not lift the mask mandate. We're worried about differentiating which students have been vaccinated and haven't, who's wearing a mask, trying to police and know which children have worn a mask. I know there is a school district, I think I mentioned last month, that's considering or was considered different color ID cards based on whether or not they've been vaccinated. That seems like there's a whole lot of problems with that. So if it's a question of doing different things for students based on their vaccination, I probably do that to me. I'll probably just trying to be transparent about what.
And we don't have any way to know what the governor's gonna do or when he's gonna do it. We could go all mask optional at some point as we see a decline in the Delta variant, or we don't see an increase in the Delta variant in our areas and regions. And, or he could return the control to the districts individually. So you're saying your greatest level of comfort would not be to make an administrative decision as it relates to that particular question?
And I would like to see that go back to the board. Change on that level.
We made any decision so far, right?
I would disagree with that, because I don't think we should have a vote on this one anyway.
Yeah, I don't
But if we're gonna vote on this one, I agree with it. I mean, we're gonna vote on this, we might as well vote on the other one. Either one,
Yeah,
because legally, whether we vote it down or don't vote it down, he's gonna be obligated to have to do something anyway, so us voting on it is really enough. But it is what it is, and we're gonna do it, let's do it, and if we're gonna do the other one, I'm fine with doing that too. Because I think most people would be overjoyed when we get to that point. I hope.
you know, with respect to the, whether we vote on it or not, I brought that up at the July meeting, that I would like to see this, back school plan come to the board for a vote. And Mr. Booker agreed with me. And I was disappointed that some board members were running around this week trying to get it taken off the agenda for a board vote. When no one spoke up at the July meeting and said, hey, I don't think this should be on the board for a vote. I don't think that was very transparent. I don't think it was very accountable to our stakeholders. I think these people deserve that we look them in the eye and we vote on a back to school plan, just like we did last year, anytime. And I found it even more interesting because there were people on this board that were very critical of the back to school plans last year. And were very vocal about that. And I would have thought that they would have welcomed this opportunity to vote on it. I didn't want this item on the agenda because I didn't trust our administration to come up with a good plan. I think Dr. Reisman did come up with a good plan. I'm thankful for it. It's been past practice. That's what people expect. It's what we led them to expect at the last meeting when no one said, hey, this shouldn't be on the board plan for a vote. People came tonight expecting that we would vote on it. And some people left because I think that they were confused by the agenda because it was on the agenda for action and then off and then back on. No one talked to me about that. I don't know if anyone talked to Mr. Booker about that, but we both asked for it to be on the agenda for action at the last meeting. I went back and listened to the meeting. I think on these big issues that it's important for the public to see that the board either stands behind what the administration is doing or they don't. So I think that Mr. Zickert's right. This didn't have to come to the board for a vote. That's true. We had that discussion at the last meeting that it doesn't. It didn't last year. It didn't this year. Some school boards have declined to put it on their agendas for a vote. I think it's cowardly. I think it's not transparent. And I think no one had a problem with it until the last few days. And they did.
Well, the problem
They
with it
didn't
became
speak
when
up
it was
about it.
solicited. That's the only thing I would say is I had my position was that I didn't think we needed to vote on it, but I made no position about that until my opinion about it was solicited.
Oh, I see, I thought we had the discussion at the last meeting where I said right up front, hey, I'd like this to be on the board agenda. And Mr. Booker said, I do
Here's
too.
where it's different though, at the last meeting, we didn't have a state mandate, which kind of changes the whole scope of this whole thing, doesn't it?
There's still other things in there. We have people asking us not to enact the state mandate. We had state mandates last year. We brought it to the board last year. I think it was disappointing that, and I think it's good for everyone to recognize the fact that board policy provides that any board member can ask that a particular item be put on the board agenda. We have 2 board members ask that this item be put on the board agenda. The board members try to get it off the board action, and that wasn't successful. And I remain glad that we're voting on it. I think if a big decision comes down from the governor, for instance, that the mask mandate goes away, it should be brought back to the board to see if the board wants to keep the mask mandate or to keep the mandatory masking in the district, or if the board wants to lift the mandatory masking in the district.
Well, weighing in on whether or not subsequent to the meeting of last month was, my assessment was that there were you, and I'll be honest, I knew there was someone else, but I didn't recall exactly who indicated, which regardless of whoever it was, whether it was you and me and whoever, that came up. The only reason any additional discussion was had is because additional input was requested. We were solicited for, do you believe it's this, or do you believe
All of
it's
you
this?
guys were, or you were?
We all got the same email, is my understanding. And when I followed up with Dan or with Dr. Weisman about it,
Okay.
It
So
was-
no one initiated that discussion of whether or not it should come off of board action.
Well, Holly and I were at the curriculum analysis, and both said, we're ready for that. Even, that's, we were asked.
I got an email that solicited input, and I believe we all got the same email.
Okay,
Do you believe it should be this, or do you believe it should be this?
okay.
That was my understanding,
So
but
no one initiated that discussion with Dr. Weisman. I think it should come off.
I don't know. I responded to an email that I got. But again, I don't think that's a negative regardless.
What's negative?
I don't think it's a negative to have had a differing opinion and say, oh, okay, well, do we have an option to make an administrative decision? In fact, I think the opposite is true in that, not that I think it's cowardice to be unwilling to vote, but to say, are we not indicating, inputting, you're able to make this decision? Or is that a demonstration of the idea that we believe that administration will put together a healthy and robust plan for return to school? Now, we're gonna vote and I'm happy to vote. That's fine. It was my impression after the last month's meeting. And then at some point in time, additional input was solicited so that there was more information and everyone was allowed to individually weigh in. I'll be honest, I don't know how any individual person knows how anyone else weighed in, but you seem to know, so, you know.
No, you're the one who said
more aware
everyone
of
was
it.
solicited. I didn't say.
The only reason I knew that is because I had a conversation with Dr. Weisman, who said he got an input from all board members. So he certainly didn't volunteer to me or proffer to board members' input had been, nor did I think it would be appropriate if he did.
Dr. Weisman, were you asked to take it off the agenda?
I'd like to say something. I sent an email to Dr. Weisman. I sent an email to Dr. Weisman last Friday morning, I believe. And I said, I have concern if this doesn't pass, does the mandate still stand? Because all of the masking is in it. And I said, that is my concern. If it doesn't pass, that will happen, that will happen. If you feel it's warranted, please contact the board attorney to find out if that is the case, to which you did. And the board attorney said, I think we should do all of this together. And so it was on as one return to school plan. He said, I think we should do it all. Don't separate it, do anything there, do it all.
And Dr. Weisman, that was the first time you heard that somebody wanted to take it off the agenda this Friday.
Well, I think we had, Mr. Zucker and Mr. Minnick, I discussed it on Monday, going over the agenda. Okay, first time.
No, that is true. I'll be very specific. I told Dr. Weisman my rationale for really wanting to do it, and nothing, zero to do with transparency, nothing. But there was other instances I thought that were important, to be honest, with you, for the sake of the district and Dr. Weisman, that with a mandate, which does make a difference then before there was a mandate, whether you believe it or not, I would vehemently disagree with that. But whatever, it doesn't.
Well,
matter.
that's not the only portion.
I
of the
agree, but that's the
back-to-school
part
plan,
you
right?
brought
There
up.
are other-
That's the part that you made a big deal about. But the
No,
mandate really didn't matter. But we should have voted anyway. But I will tell you, in my belief, the vote without the mandate and the vote with the mandate, for some people would have been different. It will be different.
I think that's true, but I
Right,
think.
so
for the
that's not what you,
people out
that's not
here,
what you said. Also, I think,
All right.
I hope we don't, I mean, I don't think, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I am not going to further put the superintendent on the spot by rehashing some conversation. He wants to offer up anything he can. He's more than welcome to. I'm fine with it. He's not going to bother me. If you want to offer up or you heard up, I'm more than willing to listen.
I just want to make
I'm
sure,
fine with that
because
too.
it was stated tonight that Dr. Reisman sort of sua sponte kind of pulled everyone just out of the clear blue, hey, do you want this on the agenda tonight? And I find that hard.
I didn't ask you. to
That's exactly how it happened for us.
No, it would appear that Mr. Zucker and Ms. Reed-Nemick had a conversation with Dr. Reisman and said, hey, we don't think this should be on the agenda. So then he came to the other board members and said, hey, is this what you guys are feeling?
That is,
So-
that is incorrect. I think
Okay.
the correct part was, at least for me,
Mhm.
the correct part for me was, I said, are you sure you want to put this on the agenda? Because if this happens, this concerns me, if this could happen, and I think it sends the wrong message of something we have to do anyway.
Right, but
That's all I
two
said.
board members had already asked for it to be on the agenda, and per board policy, it goes on the agenda, so no one came to the two board
You're
members.
both correct, because as he said, which I agree with, when we didn't have an mandate,
Right,
it makes it a whole different conversation.
I would still want it on the board agenda, but no one came to
It's a-
me
it's kind of a
and
moot point
said,
For most, not all of them.
well, we apparently added per board member discussion, all the disciplinary parts. So it's not like nobody wanted input on this, or nobody wanted to say, it just looks, and there can be intent to be non-transparent, and there can be the effect. What it looks like is we're not being transparent because we just want to throw this on administration comments and let Dan take the heat for whatever happens. And again, this is coming from people who were very critical last year of the back to school plans, said they were not good. And now all of a sudden, those state people have their implicit trust in Dr. Reisman to put it under administration and have no board oversight at all. And again, my reason for putting this on the agenda is not because I don't trust Dr. Reisman to put together a good back to school plan. It is to show that the board supports the back to school plan or doesn't. And to show our stakeholders that we're willing to look them in the eye and make the hard decisions and put the plan up or down.
Well, since you brought up the discipline part, it says I feel like, this will be my last comment, because I'm not going to take all night. But I do want to get accuracy here, which if you were in the room and you heard it, I agree with you, you can report whatever you want. Not being in the room, it's interesting how you would get that information, but that's up to you. Dr. Weisman and I had a conversation on Friday on the discipline plan. He called me up, or I called him. I asked to talk to him. He called me back. We talked about the discipline thing. Originally, he had in there 14 days of quarantine, that the students would have to quarantine for 14 days and came without a mask. I told him, I don't think we can do that. I think that we needed to check with the legal department, because quarantining, being in close contact with somebody like they had last year is one thing. If I had a child and I sent them to school and you sent them home and they were quarantined for 14 days, when you don't know if they've been in close contact with anybody for any reason, I don't know if we could legally do that. That was the conversation I had. with Dr. Weisman on the discipline plan and told him, I think we needed to get some advice on whether we can do some of this stuff, because the worst thing we can do is put stuff into a discipline thing that we legally can't do, because that's not going to be a good thing to do. He at that point, I believe, decided that was a good idea and consulted with our board attorney to find out what we could do or what we should do and what their legal advice was for other places. That was the conversation Dr. Weisman and I had over discipline.
Okay,
Verbatim.
I wasn't even referring to that. Didn't know that you had a conversation or not. All I know is since we saw my point was since we saw the back to school plan last month, the huge chunk went in regarding.
Well, you
discipline.
did indicate,
So-
I'm sorry, Martin.
So that was just, I know nothing about your conversation with Dr. Weisman and the quarantine. I don't,
I could be wrong, but is that the reason the big chunk of it? I don't want to put.
I don't have a clue.
But that's what the
I'm
big-
just
that's
saying
what the
that
big-
people
that's what the-
want it,
that's what the big-
but they don't want the response.
That's what the big chunk is.
Well, no, I wanted input after it was a requirement that after I understood fully that it was a requirement that we vote. Absent that, I wasn't so, seeking a great deal of input. Dr. Weisman and I had a similar conversation after it was made clear, we're gonna vote, okay, great, we're gonna vote. So now I have a different look at it, and whether it had come to a vote or not, I would have had the same input, looking at it from the policy perspective, which was, are we complying with our discipline policy under the 14 days of suspension, or, right, because that's what we went from calling it quarantine to calling it suspension for up to 14 days. So I said, okay, we have policy that is driven by Senate Bill 100. And I would have concern that we haven't more clearly defined what those parameters are to be sure we would be consistent with that. That conversation happened on Wednesday before I went out of town. So, but you did specifically mention discipline when you said board members had an impact on the addition of that information. Again, I'm not sure how you would know that.
Well,
but
it
yes,
got there
those conversations-
somehow.
And your
I asked
assumption was
Dr.
correct.
No, I asked Dr. Reisman, where did it come from? He said, board member.
Okay, so you did, but that's.
But I
great.
don't know anything about this specific conversation that Matt had, or this specific conversation that you have when there's a huge
Got it.
chunk that appears in the
Yeah, right.
plan.
That's-
It was from board member suggestion.
Got it.
So
is there additional discussion in regards to the plan itself? Okay, we have a motion to approve the return to school plans 2021-2022 school year as presented. The motion is on the floor. If we have no additional discussion for the return to school plan, then we'll proceed with the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Mrs. Howe.
Aye.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mr. Zicker.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville.
Aye.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Mr. Booker. Mrs. Reed Nemick. Aye. Do I have a motion to adopt the resolution to approve District 100's tentative budget for July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022 as presented?
Motion to approve. Second.
Member Zickert made a motion and member Herrera seconded the motion to adopt the resolution to approve District 100's tentative budget for July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022 as presented. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Zickert.
Yes.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville. Aye. Mrs. Howe. Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Mrs. Reed Nemick.
Aye. Motion passes. Next on the agenda is revisions to existing Board of Education policies. Are there any existing Board of Education policies any members of the board would like to take out for separate consideration? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve roll call items 5 through 22 revisions to existing Board of Education policies as presented?
Motion to approve.
I'm sorry, you said item 5? Item 5. doesn't it start with item 7?
Yeah, so that we might update the script. because I'm pulled it. So that's all.
Oh, that's a, item 6. 6 is the budget.
Okay. Are there any existing Board of Education policies any members of the board would like to take out for separate consideration? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve roll call action items number 7 through 22, revisions to existing Board of Education policies as presented?
It's 24. I'm sorry.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
through 24 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Member Whitcomb made a motion and member Booker seconded the motion to approve consent agenda items 7 through 24 as presented. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Whitcomb,
Aye.
Mr. Booker, Mr. Zicker,
Aye.
Mrs. Mayfeld, Mrs. Howe, Mr. Herrera,
Aye.
Mrs. Reed Namick.
Aye. Motion passes. The following discussion items will be coming up for further review and or possible action in the future. Background information has been provided and the board may ask questions and or request clarification at this time. Starting with ESSER goals.
So we have included the original budget and expenditures to date for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. You know, there's been some just requests to make sure that we're providing that. So, we're going to feedback on how we're providing that. Let's see, and then I've included attachment called superintendent goals for 21-22. These include goal areas. For most of the items, that includes some sort of benchmark data, a target. So I know there's been some discussion around wanting to measure the impact of the ESSER funds, the initiatives tied to the ESSER funds. So this is my recommended start of the discussion. Should we ask Officer Kaplan if he still wants to stick around? He's good.
Hey, you guys are good. I see up at 4:30.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I think since I uploaded the goals last Wednesday, did baseline data for the elementary math goal. This last year, we're at 43% of the benchmark, and so my target would be 10% over that 53%. But otherwise, the benchmark data targets, I have a column that says area, so these could be individual district. Sorry, they could be individual goals just for me and my evaluation process. There could be goals that and targets that we set for the whole district. Could I noted which ones apply to ESSER as an area. And then there was some interest in some more regular reporting perhaps, and so I noted which ones would be monthly and which ones come intermittently. Again, just a starting point. I think we did include also just the school report card for the district. It shows kind of overall where we're at in the 18-19 school year. We don't have this for the 19-20 school year, or we didn't get it for the 2021 school
In October.
In October, we will get something.
So the discussion in regards to just the overall goals, the overall goal of ESSER being to reduce the learning loss that was suffered as a result of the COVID pandemic. And I just wanted to ask, Dr. Weisman, I had asked Dr. Weisman if he felt that this needed to be a discussion or if additional direction was needed. And we discussed that. So bringing it to the board for information regarding that.
is an overall general umbrella of reduction of the COVID learning loss gap. Is that too broad of a goal? Is that exactly the goal that we want to use? Do we want more specific goals, which is Dr. Wiesman then has added the goals in the memo that he provided. So looking at opening that discussion for the board in regards to, there's a whole lot of goals on there as well. Is there a priority for what areas we look at in regards to ESSER, remembering that we have ESSER through 2024, funding through 2024, correct? Was in September 2024? Yeah.
And for 3, we can actually, we have that committed, we can spend more than
1 year beyond 2024.
In the goals, I know, at the original meeting, some of the state notes, people wanted this in relation to the state averages or state standards. Is that what these targets are, or what we're shooting for?
Say that again?
It's in the feedback of the curriculum meeting, when we were talking about incorporating that, that's not included in this, right? This was done before that.
Yeah, a lot of this I've been working on before that, and some of these actually we even discussed as early as January this year as we looked at this upcoming school year. So generally, the way that we look at our goal setting process is we have some kind of bigger key indicators, and so most of this is me just pulling what historically we looked at as key indicators. I do have some dates on there. This is a qualifier that says December 2020, so I'm blaming that on lack of sleep. So it's the same thing. I do have that target.
I would, on the social emotional learning assessment favorability rate, we did have some people at the meeting who were concerned about that being the only assessment, and they looked at what we were going to do for K2 for primary grades. Some of the ones I got some feedback during the week, that I think I should share for transparency reasons, that thought that part of the problem too is they wanted to know there's consistency in our buildings, that if we did come up with something K2, that each school would be doing kind of the same things, we'd be reporting back the same information, and that essentially the information that was gathered by the SEL surveys would be used, would be not have to be targeted in the same way, but the information would be used in the same way to get answers to problems among the 5 elementary schools. There was some consistency, and the survey results may be different among schools, but how they use it or what they do with it would be consistent. So if the kids in each one of the 5 schools would get consistent assistance if needed, or whatever.
Yeah, I know on that list of things to consider, one of the things is some type of social emotional measurement for K1, 2, committee. I don't have benchmark data right now to maybe target on that. But that's something that's on the list of things that we need to look at.
And Panorama offers that. But it's teacher reported. And so that was what we were gonna launch right before COVID hit. So I would suggest we utilize the same platform, that way it's the same language with the data interpretation.
Yeah, that was just some feedback. I got feedback from a couple of some that after the meeting. So, you know, the other things on the email. So surprising, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised that I actually got 2 of them. People pointed that out. The other thing quickly on the ESSER thing was there was some concern about, I guess it wasn't concerned ESSER, I guess it was a look at what we could do with ESSER, was that I know we spent title money on reading improvement or a reading program for the title schools, which means South and Caledonia didn't get it. So I think there was some desire to know if we could use ESSER money to give, because those schools have, I mean, just because they don't hit Title I doesn't mean there aren't kids that struggle there too. That there wasn't some way to supplement them, maybe not with title money, but with other money to, maybe not as many kids, because I mean, it's, you know, some of those schools have been right on the, Caledonia's probably never been a Title I school. Seth, I thought Seth was a little one time, at least once.
They did.
Yeah, that's what I thought. No, it was Seth. They hit it one time, because they were right on the borderline a couple times. But then we could do something for them too, because we're, in essence, from their point of view, I don't disagree with you. We are penalizing, we could be penalizing those kids just because they're not in the Title school.
I can speak to that when we get audited, we have to be able to show that the title building will receive more funding when it all comes out of the wash. So you have to be careful that you don't take other funds, even things out, because the low income ratio, those buildings should be receiving more. The particular intervention that they're discussing is very specific to buildings that have larger quantities of students that are struggling specifically with reading. So while Seth and Cal, we ensure that they have interventions, they have everything that they need, this likely is not something that they would be utilizing with large amounts of their grade levels. So there's also that piece there appropriate. With that,
Didn't Seth buy the program anyway?
they have parts of it. They don't have the whole thing with the rest of them. They have little components that match the small group needs, but not large quantities.
In regards to ELA proficiency and math proficiency, I'm looking at the Illinois Advanced report card. The 28% ELA proficiency, and then there's like this little thing that says state average. Does that indicate that we are behind state average?
It indicates whether I got pulled up.
So that little green should be all the way over to where the state average is.
State,
if we want
yes,
to
that's
consider.
showing that we are behind state.
We have, like, to see, I think we have a math proficiency or a math goal. As well as ELA goal, 28% of that, in my understanding, 28% of our students are meeting proficiency.
Correct. Yeah, like,
And that is compared to all students in the state of Illinois only.
correct.
Yeah, if we have a math proficiency goal, it would seem to stand to reason that we need one for ELA as well. Okay, I mean, that's just one person's opinion, but it looks like we're behind in all state areas. Many schools likely are. You know, I would probably likewise say the same could be said for science proficiency. Now, to a lesser degree, perhaps, where, you know, the gap may be less, but the gap between English and math are very similar, 4 percentage points difference. It seems that it would bode that, you know, we would have an ELA proficiency goal as well.
Just curious, because I asked the last time, because I knew we didn't get it. What are the prioritized standards?
The prioritized standards are what we've identified to be on the report card. So the state has lots of standards. So we pulled out, prioritized a handful of those, and parents see those on the report card.
So those are the same we did last year. That we didn't hit. When we did the scorecard, we wanted 100%, we got 40.
Yes, they are the same.
Totally the same one.
The same ones.
I also don't see these as things that necessarily the needle would move very quickly. So an annual goal seems kind of short. So possibly something just by the end of ESSER.
How do our district demographics compare to state demographics when it comes to reduced lunch? English language learners, groups who tend to underperform.
Generally,
And you don't need to answer that right now, as we said, but I think that's something that should be considered as well.
Generally, just real quick, the state low income rate is right at 49%. District, just give it overall. It's 40. 45.
Like English language learners, special education students, like I think the breakdowns, that would be good, so we can try to get this out.
A question on the distribution of funds that you've provided. Just trying to understand, under summer school staff, under ESER 1, we indicate, or it indicates that we use no money, right? Under expended to date, we have no outstanding POs, obviously, they're not really a PO, but under ESER 2, under the same category, summer school staff, we use 222,030 and so on. Is there a reason why we didn't use that out of the ESER 1 bucket first?
Yeah, the reason why we didn't was because when we originally had brought the ESER 1 grant, we were collecting $60,000. We had way more expense than that, on the first round of summer school. And so we put it through the ESER 2 grant because we knew we could capture it all. And then we had worked on doing a budget amendment to move that money around, as you saw on the spreadsheet. So when we update that spreadsheet for this upcoming spending, the second round of summer school, which is July, actually went through the ESER 1 grant. But we had to wait for the amendment to get done because otherwise we weren't going to be able to capture it. So sometimes, when we're talking about how you can move money around, based on how your programs change, that's what we had to wait for. So that's why we put it through ESER 2, because we knew we had plenty of money around the first go around of summer school.
And the second go around of summer school happened after.
Yeah, we didn't pay it until the August payroll. So the second round of summer school got paid the first payroll in August, so that would get up to.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Rather than partially drain or fully drain this bucket and then put a part of it over
Right.
there.
It's too hard to pay when you're doing payroll. It's too hard to only put some of them to this grant,
Sure.
some into that grant, because we had so many people we had to pay, we had to do a mass upload, and so it was either just we want grant and the other, but we're trying to change ones and trying to figure out that. So that won't happen again, I don't think. So I think we'll be fine.
Some of these that we have spent no money out of yet, on one, I'm looking at ESER, I'm sorry. Yeah, ESER grant 2, sorry, not 1. I get the health safety quarter, get it. Like the panorama and communication tools and materials, we have an idea, we haven't spent anything on any of those items?
Yeah, we haven't gotten a bill from Panorama yet. We probably won't until this fall sometime.
And that's the full 200. So when that one goes through, it'll wipe the most of it out.
How does what we approved in March for Panorama, where did that come from? Like, does that come out of 2 or does that come out of 1?
That's ESER 2, yep, the MTSS platform was what we had approved. Brought that, because we needed to get that one going. earlier in the spring.
So
The
it was
amount
approved, but
that,
we
so the
didn't-
amount we approved just hasn't come out yet.
Some of these just sit there for a while
They do.
before they get used.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's because like programs like this, they have implementation periods and training and things like that. And then a lot of times we don't even get building up. So whereas licenses, when we're buying wells, a lot of times those will be
Sure.
upfront. The things that have a human component to it and a training component to it, a lot of times we won't get billed for that until we're going to school.
I think it's the last question on this particular point. I'm still unclear on where this $1 million, $1,154,000 is. What's the intent to utilize for retaining teachers? Were we planning to get rid of it was my understanding we weren't ripping teachers,
Right,
so I don't understand how we're spending $1 million to keep teachers we were already going to keep.
yes,
This was before we knew.
that would be, this again was one of those ones where hurry up and get it in so you can start to spend money and then customize it later, so.
So we'll see that money go somewhere else.
You will, right now, what we're doing is we beefed up our social work supports in the buildings for students. And so that's kind of the first chunk of it, so it wasn't necessarily retaining teachers as much as it was providing supports for students.
We added,
We had two, yeah, we had, I think actually three social workers.
So will we see that category title change
You
then?
will,
Yeah,
you'll see these start to get adjusted for what we're actually doing. With the money.
And how frequently will we see this? Whatever, like a spreadsheet? That's
Well,
something we
we're
see
gonna-
quarterly or?
Yeah, we're gonna update these monthly. Now, until we change the categorizations in the grant, you won't see those titles changing. But we can always give you an update on the kinds of things that are actually going through.
And we'll just kind of then be asking the questions this month and on a general basis going forward and have significantly fewer questions or necessary time.
A lot of it's pretty self-explanatory, like you're gonna see a big chunk of money go through for transportation at summer school. Because we just got those bills, those were some of the first student bills that we approved today. That was almost all ESSER summer school. There was a little bit that wasn't ESSER summer school because we still have to run our regular PS5 programs. And so that wasn't supplemental, so that got paid out of the district budget and then the up and above, that paid out of the ESSER funds. So.
That was, on the teacher retention thing, I want to say about that really quick, because I think it's real important when we look at that. The extra social workers, I think that's wonderful, that we should spend that money whatever. I think just in the general teacher part though, in my opinion, we have to be careful because when you look at sustainability for that stuff, retaining teachers that we already have, the teachers we're gonna keep paying for anyway, and we're using ESSER money on it now, that's gotta be replaced by our regular money sometime down the road. But the social worker part, we may not need as many when, but we have to make a decision then, educated decision on, do we want to prioritize this versus that? But in theory, some of this stuff, you would think would go away after we've had a couple of years of getting back to where we could have been.
Yeah.
Without
Exactly right.
COVID, so to speak.
Yep. And
So we
that-
need the support now because we have a big need now.
Right, and that's what we talked about a lot of those services meeting was, this money needs to get us to a point where once this money's gone, we can sustain what we need. We need to use this for fixing things now and get to a sustainable model. So you're not dependent on, extra money all the time to keep doing everything.
Well, I think one of the good parts is we may see things that we did through this that may have priority over what we were doing before. And now is a good time to see that, yeah, we maybe should have done this as a priority right now. So, yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Do we progress monitor the same way for ESSER 1 and 2 as we will for 3?
So, like as far as the goals that I presented, I would look at ESSER as a whole, like when you think through that makes sense.
So we've discussed, it's like, not changes necessarily, but how SEL would be looked at from AC all the way through 12. So kind of some information maybe on that going forward. And then prioritizing, are there goals that would be prioritized as a board to feel, or all of the goals that are listed? My goals.
Yeah, so we can definitely prioritize these. I've tried to pare them down. For example, the employee engagement score, the parent satisfaction score aren't specifically like instructional type goals. There's a handful here that are more report-based goals where like if we check this off the list, get to you some information. Those first 6 or 7 are probably the student-facing goals that seem to be most interesting. And I don't think that those are, I think it's fair to have at least that many. And if we add an ELA 1, we expand the social emotional learning 1, more grade level. And then we come up with targets that not only just annual targets, but in a couple of years once you're done, multi-year target. I think I think those are definitely that's.
Well, and we have the, one of the goals here is to submit an equity audit to the Board of Education, and this report date is by March of 2022. But we sort of indicated that that's not something we're prepared to, that would be something that would naturally be set off based on a prior conversation.
Yep, I can change some of the dates.
Any other discussion?
Well, I guess that the same would be true for the exploratory report on EC. And what was the intent on the report by 2020? I'm sorry, what was the intent of those dates?
Okay, so I think the intent on there was 2022. The recommendations from the administration, the administrative compensation model, and for selection in high school. And I have those just listed as superintendent goals. So
Yeah, so to me, they would come off of this. I mean, I just,
yeah,
I think a lot of these are more district and ESSER goals than they are superintendent goals, but those two would, I think, probably be.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Okay, moving on. Upcoming contract renewals and reports.
Just quickly to go through here, we've got maintenance needs being discussed, business services coming from regularly, representing the budget, draft budget. We don't have a fuel bid this year. We'll go back to RBC and try to get an MOU. Usually we try to do the MOU with Rockdale College before we get too far in the year because we just want to make sure when we're offering it to kids as part of registration process in late fall that we're comfortable with that and we'll put that for the fall here. Boundary lines on an annual basis is generally something that we want to start talking about earlier. But that's not something necessarily for this year, but in the future. On the technology use agreement, it's part of the handbook. Then the handbook is getting to a little bit late just because that rate process presentations here, so that will still question oversight for that.
Superintendent comments, administrative reports.
So we did include, not to include through the reading, some programming, just highlight a couple spots on that. For the high school, the amount of credit recovery, number of students that were able to get into credit recovery, and the number of courses that they were able to complete more than double. Pre-COVID years last year was kind of wonky because it's just different. Appreciate the course support to get that going. Kids were able to be impacted. And then that's on slide 6, I think. And then slide 8 just has some historical data on our participation for elementary and middle school. Kind of same idea, the number of elementary school students that elementary school students that participate in something that's significantly larger than because some of the kids that were in session 1 also attended session 2. They don't just take one of those sessions. Participation rate, really a big uptick in celebration of the middle school students. Middle school is always tough because we're not allowed to have, state law prohibits us from having more students just because they have a birthday. But retaining kids, kids that would be in high school, or even in middle school, is also a nightmare. So we usually have interventions that are happening at the end of the school year and over the summer to target kids that need that extra help so that we can get the requirements that not just social promoting. It's a big celebration to get over to those students. And then the only other thing I throw out there is on slide 9, there's a list of community programs that things where they're participating at cost or low cost. To us to pay the participation fees for that, which I think is a great way to get kids out in the community, not just in our schools, but out in the community. So bring some of the money. Let's see, I did include, since we're talking about ESSER, I also included another ESSER report, just an overall summary of the impact that the district is able to have on students using ESSER funds. So I took kind of the big bucket items that you've seen now in a couple different spots. Some of the just tried to say, okay, here's 5 or 6 areas where if a community member asks you what are you using ESSER money for, you can say, hey, we spent over $300,000 on summer school. We spent over $250,000 on PPE sanitation. We spent $250,000 on technology, and a public access program, provide Wi-Fi, and access to everything. So that's kind of some talking points for you, separate from targets from student achievement. I would say that as far as the look ahead, we are the student council come back and start the report. Greg will have his final budget. We do around next month have things like 6-day enrollment, which gives us a real solid, consistent over time look at enrollment. Compensation for administrators. Any changes that might come from the district handbook for school attendance. I also got on there that the joint annual conference is in November. I'm sure board members are interested in that. That's all.
So I just wanted to mention, as far as summer school, or I suggest or ask, is there an intention to share some of those successes, some of that information that we have, what we would call the wins of the summer, with parents as a whole? Is that something, I mean, I just feel like we spent a lot of money on it because it was necessary, and, we had pretty good response. And then secondarily, where's our timeline for gauging interest for next summer so that we're well in advance of, because the one area where I went, oh man, is when we look at middle school on the report, then we say when it comes down to slide 5, middle school interest-based versus academic recovery, more obviously, but if we have need, because we're going to be tracking this, part of one of the suggested in additional measures from the curriculum committee meeting was to have some sort of tracking for on-target rates in middle school. And, do we need more offerings or academic things that are of interest to them, or what's our timeline, and that we be well in advance of that so that we're, and then the last question I had is, do we have any summer school, we don't even know the answer to this now. Did we have summer school programs that ended up not going because we didn't meet participation? Yes. Yeah, so, just to fine tune so that we don't spend, and I guess then the last thing I would say is that was a really nice catalog, but I can't imagine it came cheap. And maybe next year, we could just evaluate, it is maybe something like that, I mean, it was great, it was nice, but, maybe if we're talking about it sooner because we have more time, maybe we'll have the ability look at where that money is allocated for the cost.
Is the expectation, especially at the middle, or excuse me, elementary school level, to offer the same type of offerings next summer, just with the intention of keeping kids engaged over the summer?
Yeah, a lot of the ideas came from the teachers, so we would probably do that proposal and what are you interested in teaching? And then we went through a whole piece specifically for elementary of, is it different languages? Is it, some of it more reading based, arts based, PE, physical based? So we kind of went through that process too. I would imagine we'd do the same thing.
And if we knew sooner what the teachers were interested in teaching, then we could be gauging from students which of those would have the highest likelihood of, maximized attendance or enrollment. And,
Yeah, I hope.
scale back the offerings.
Yeah, I hope we have that much money again, we probably will. Is that we have time to look at what these kids really need, so the teachers can provide guidance to the parents on, your kid's really interested in this, but if they want to be successful in second grade, maybe they should do this.
That's a really
And let
good
the parents
point.
decide. I mean, I'm not trying to force them into it. I just think we need to provide pertinent information to the parents and say, here's what we think, you can choose, but here's our best advice, so to speak.
That's a really, really good point.
I
Matt.
think that after school tutoring will help once we get that up and running, because we'll know where kids are at as we go along. I'm sure. So
Well, and even some of, like Matt said, even some of the interest-based learning, if you had a second grade teacher who could say, they may not want to do a, third grade readiness, instructional or academic recovery, but this class, these couple of interest-based might lean into the areas where what's going to happen in the class would help better prepare them for, for third grade. They could still be doing an interest-based class, but it would have a nice added bonus of being something that they could use some additional support in.
yeah, when they did the proposals, they had to show how they were tying it there, even
Yeah,
if the kids
yeah.
didn't exactly see it, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, timeline wise, obviously the academic data will know throughout the year this year, but we'll be able to start this sooner. Last year, you voted in December that we were gonna switch to in-person. So then in January, we got that up and going. So a lot of this began in February, whereas I think this year, we'll have conversations around this fairly soon here. But I would say by November, December, we'll be starting to talk summer. We'll be a few months earlier. Last year, we were.
Yes, grand.
So,
Putting up one.
If I could just add to, Megan, thank you for this. I think this is great information. I think it's the best I felt all night, probably the best I felt all year sitting here. So I really appreciate this. And I like to see the credit recovery in the high schools. I think that's a great number. Thank you for putting it together so I can understand.
Yeah. And we share with families so that they could see, this was a lot of work for people. Not just the report to put all of that together and that takes time too to assemble all the data, but we spent a lot of money and it was money well spent.
Is this something that can be added to the website?
Might as well tweet our board where we can. There's enough people who won't be happy tomorrow, but a lot of other things. So, that's a win for sure.
Any other discussion? At this time, the board will be going back into closed executive session to continue our discussions from earlier. There will not be action to follow. I have a motion to go into closed executive session regarding section 2, heading C, exclusions, so number 1 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee of the public body.
So,
Member Herrera made a motion and member Zickert seconded the motion to go into executive session. Roll call, please.
Mr. Herrera.
Aye.
Mr. Zickert.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mrs. Hauk. Mrs. Whitcomb.
Aye.
Ms. Mayville. Mrs. Reed Neiman.
Aye. This is probably. gonna be first.
Yeah, I mean, mostly I was just gonna say, here are the goals, here are the recommended goals. Yeah.
It is now 9:26 PM and we are out of closed executive session. Roll call, please.
Mr. Booker.
Here.
Mr. Herrera.
Here.
Mrs. Howe. Ms. Mayville.
Here.
Mrs. Remick.
Here.
Mrs. Whitcomb.
Here.
Mr. Zicker.
Here.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Number seven.
Member Rivera made a motion and Member Zickert seconded the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, meeting adjourned at 9:27.